With a ton of Neo Geo titles and classic NES remakes like Blaster Master Zero, the Switch has proven to be a great place to experience or revisit classic games, either out of love or nostalgia. So it's no surprise that Bandai Namco would release their Namco Museum game for the Nintendo Switch eShop. With 11 classic games, some popular, some obscure, it's a trip down memory lane. The question is it a trip worth taking? Let's get into it. Namco Museum for Switch isn't the first time Namco's released an anthology game collection, it's been done since the original PlayStation. However, instead of rock-solid games like Pole Position or Galaxian, Bandai Namco instead replaced them with lesser-known titles like SkyKid, Tank Force, and even the Tower of Druaga. This may have been done to mix up the variety, instead of selling the same old game as before, which I admire. It's just that these newer games aren't really that great. I don't mean that Pac-Man isn't great, but it's a game that's better when looking back, where Rolling Thunder is a more modern-looking title in comparison. Rolling Thunder and its sequel are well-made games that control well, but yet is still challenging. That all being said, I'm not sure why Bandai Namco feels that the only games they can put into a museum game are from the 16-bit era and earlier. It would have been more compelling to see them include a wider variety of titles, with games like the original Ridge Racer and Tekken. Playability and options. If there's one thing that Namco Museum is not lacking, it is options. The options and playability are fairly deep, within Namco Museum, when you consider the games they ported onto this collection were primarily arcade games, with a few console titles, that didn't really have options other than Player 1 or Player 2. Visuals. The game looks pretty good, despite being visuals and graphics from the 70s, 80s and 90s, especially in the Switch's handheld mode. Not only did the gameplay look good, it kept up pace, not lagging or skipping, and even the marquee artwork on the sides of many of the games looked pretty clear. Finally, the extra game, which I briefly mentioned before, Pac-Man vs. Pac-Man vs. is the only game from a more modern console, the GameCube. Seeing how this version of Museum is on the Switch, it makes sense that Namco includes an exclusive Nintendo game. This game is probably the most fun, in a group setting, as it allows you to connect multiple Joy-Cons, as in up to 4. The game is simple, one person controls the iconic Pac-Man, while 3 other players play the ghosts trying to get him. Versus is presented in HD and looks the best out of all the games in the collection. If you played the original game on the GameCube, you know that it allowed players to connect their Game Boy Advances, so that each player couldn't actually see Pac-Man on screen. While that's not possible in this version, you can connect a second Switch, assuming you have one, and have one player play Pac-Man on one, while 3 other players all play Ghosts on the second Switch. It's not ideal, like the Game Boy solution, but it still sounds fun,